All right, guys, we are back with another AI update. In fact, it's been a long time since I've had any sort of meaningful updates in the AI generative space on my channel. And before you guys roll your eyes because you're not interested, remember, the reason why we are getting into this subject is A, it's a reality. We have to sort of embrace it, that it is a technological change that is quickly surfacing up to potentially the sync licensing market. I think first it'll be probably more in the stock licensing market, but we're going to talk about that in this interview. But also, if it's going to be a reality, we need to change and shift and adjust our focus. And that's really all I've been talking about in the last 6 to 7 months in Sync Academy and really on my channel, which is basically steering you guys away from being kind of anonymous background instrumental producers to being more of a foreground spotlight artist in the sync world. And the reason why I'm able to keep up to tabs on the AI generative models and the technology is because of this gentleman you guys see here. This is Max Hilsdorf. Many of you guys maybe recognize him. He was on my channel a few times before. Max is a data scientist. He's a consultant. He's an educator. And he works for a company called Statworks out in Germany. And he also has an amazing Medium blog. If you guys want to know how I'm keeping up to date with this industry, with the technological changes, with the advances, you're looking at him right here. He's pretty much my primary source. And so if you guys want to be kept up onto the latest trends of what's happening in this industry, you guys should be following him, subscribing to him. And, I get a lot of updates from him through LinkedIn. So if you want to go friend him on LinkedIn, that would be a great way to do it as well. So Max, welcome back, man. And obviously, first of all, thank you for just being you, because you have a very unique focus in this world where you are a data scientist and a musician. For those that didn't catch our previous interview, Max is a musician himself, and so he can speak our language. I really feel like he is one of our team members as a fellow musician. But being a data scientist, he can really look into the weeds, into the fine details of these AI generative models, how they work, how the technology works, what the implications may be, where he thinks the technology is going to go, what its limitations are. And we really need to know that stuff, because if this is going to be a disruptive, agent for us in sync licensing, obviously we need to be kept abreast of all that stuff. So first of all, thank you, Max, for just being you. You're a great, awesome human being, and we're really, really appreciative just to have you as a part of this community. Really, really appreciate you. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Last time I had you into this on this channel, it was about 6-7 months ago. Back then, we were looking at primarily mono music being generated by, I think Meta and Google were kind of the leaders in the space. There's others as well. It was primarily mono. It was a lower sample rate. It still kind of sounded like compressed MP3s. It didn't sound amazing. The length of these tracks weren't super long. I think like 30 seconds was where most of them were maxing out. They couldn't make anything longer than that. And obviously, some prompts would get you a better result, and some prompts would really result in kind of just chaotic noise that you could barely classify as music. And here we are at the start of 2024. What are the major developments you've seen as a data scientist in the last 6 or 7 months? If you can kind of go through those, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for inviting me, first of all. And I'm also happy to catch up with everyone in this domain, because, of course, we've seen lots of improvements. So the world hasn't changed since then, but there's lots of cool new things. And I think some of them you've mentioned already when it comes to like these models that we know, text-to-music models that surprised us last year and will continue to surprise us probably. So we have stereo now, which was also really cool, because when I first heard kind of the public release, hey, Music Gen, the Meta model that is, can now do stereo sounds, I was like, wait, I didn't even realize it was missing that component, right? I was like, okay, yeah, wow, so this has been mono all of the time. And I thought, okay, maybe this is kind of a small improvement, but I figured it's not going to be too major. But personally, for me, listening to these examples in mono and stereo makes such a huge difference. And I suspect a lot of this feeling that this is unnatural and not so lively may actually come from this point. So like we're just missing kind of this stereo input and this kind of vibrant and lively sounds from all sides. So that's a major one, I think, and it's a cool thing to have. And we've seen lots of these smaller improvements. So like we now have stereo, great. It's still not gonna replace every musician, but we have stereo. That's great. And we have higher sample rates now. That's one part. And there's two developments. So first of all, we've moved from, I think Music Gen was still roughly maybe 22K hertz sample rate. And we've moved now to models that generate 48K hertz. So it's like, it's possible now. I think Stable Audio, for example, does that. And Music Gen also generates in 44K now, I think. So we've moved kind of to this high quality sample rate tier. Still, that doesn't mean that everything sounds great. So I can also, you can already upsample music from lower sample rates. Question is, is all of the sound also carrying over to that kind of new sample rate? And we've seen some improvements there as well, where you can really, there's AI tools now where you can send in a track at a lower sample rate, like down to 16K or something, and it will upsample the music in a very, very natural way, as if someone had, exported it in 44K right away. So that's like some of these smaller improvements, but I feel like if they're incremental and they happen over and over again over a year or two, I think if you look back to Music LM and now check out some of the recent music generative models, it feels like quite the major step still, even though it was like smaller improvements. So yeah, that's one thing. And maybe another thing that's coming now pretty recently by from the end of 2023 on is the whole lyrics thing. So you might remember that all of these music generative models, whenever they tried to generate vocals, it always sounded awful, like nowhere close to anything you could use. It was annoying. You would always like prompt again and try to get an output without vocals, because everything with vocals was just not listenable. So it's like it was crazy. And now we're actually starting to see multiple emerging models that have lyrics in their focus. So one example is Suno AI, which is a startup, and they've partnered with Microsoft now. And Microsoft is beginning to include music generation in their Bing search. So I think it's called Microsoft Copilot now. So you can kind of generate music with pretty good vocals and lyrics through a chatbot now. So things are getting crazy. But yeah, I think that's some of the cool commercial improvements we saw.
Yeah, and I remember back then, I had a lot of people telling me, Jesse, yeah, it can make music, but it's going to take 10 years before music is going to be, from these models, listenable, somewhat passing for music. And I just didn't think that was the case, only because I see what was happening with those language models, right? What we saw with ChatGPT and how quickly people were basically taking that technology and adapting it and remixing it and re-engineering it and making improvements upon it. And I thought, there's so much energy and hype in this generative AI space right now. Music is obviously one of the biggest, newest frontiers. It's exciting, and music is like the most popular thing on earth. Of course, that's going to be the next place where everybody's going to put their brain power. And sure enough, at the end of the year, we had fully capable models that were producing 44K, sample rated music. Do you know about the length of music? Has that increased? Because I remember back in early 2023, I remember them talking about 30 seconds was about where a lot of these models were kind of not able to, advance any further. Do you know if Meta's Music Gen or Google's Music LM has surpassed that?
Yeah, so length is another thing. It's also similar to the language generation domain again, because there you had the same problem. So the problem is not that these models cannot generate an hour of music, because essentially the problem is they generate like one piece of music and then the next piece of music and then the next. So they kind of move through the track and generate one piece after the other. So a couple of milliseconds, then another couple of milliseconds, and so on. So in principle, you can continue this for however long you want, but they only have a limited memory. So if your memory is kind of 30 seconds or so, and then you generate something that's a minute long, then half of the track is missing because it's not in the memory anymore, essentially. So that's kind of a technical thing that's good to know, I think. So the limitation is not generating long sequences, but keeping all of the context in when generating long sequences. And we've seen the same thing with language models. These context lengths, they've been increasing drastically at the end of, or in the middle of 2023, for example. So in music, we have kind of the same thing. So these models already have, most of them have like 30-second windows or something. That's a pretty regular thing I've seen. There's also longer ones. I think Stable Audio by Stability AI. They also did lots of like image generations and so on. They're pretty well known. I think they went up to over a minute, but personally, I think all of this doesn't really matter if the music doesn't stay consistent. So even these models, when I'm using something like Music Gen, the problem is that usually after 10 seconds, everything is already going crazy and not really making sense anymore. So why increase that to 2 hours of music? I think we first have to kind of fix the consistency issue technically, and then maybe expand.
That's a great point. Yeah, and that'll be something that we get into a little later into this conversation in terms of what AI models are struggling with, and that certainly would be one we can check off, and also what they're doing well. So guys, stay tuned to the end of this conversation. We're going to definitely talk about that. So your point of view, you're a data scientist, you're a musician. Has the speed of improvement and advancement in this space impressed you? Has it been faster than what you expected, slower, or right on track? What were your expectations starting 2023, and where are we now? How did it all work out for you?
Yeah. That's such a hard one to answer because you know that with technology you always tend to kind of overestimate the short-term effects and underestimate the long-term effects, and everybody's like that. Same for me. Just because I'm a data scientist, I still have the same kind of heuristics and decision problems essentially. So, but with AI, because everything has been moving so fast, I've really kind of given up on having any fixed expectations to what will happen in exactly 1 year or 2 years, because it's not credible to claim that in 1 year we'll have that kind of quality, because I don't know. But personally, I think the last year has been kind of going as I would have expected, probably, because, I was really shocked by Music LM. So when that came out, I was like, wow, this is something new. And I knew that maybe we would see a new model that's like ChatGPT quality just for music, which produces amazing music in 2023. But I was like, it's probably going to take, a small number of years until that happens. And I think we went from in last year from like something that's recognizable as music, but clearly flawed in all ways you can imagine, to something that's getting closer to sounding like high quality music, but it's just missing a lot of kind of aspects. We might cover that later. But kind of we went from something really, really unuseful to something that's almost useful already. So I suspect the speed is kind of what I had anticipated. And the question is now, how is that going to continue? And personally, I think this year and the next year is probably the time where we'll have the ChatGPT moment for music. Just kind of would be my wild expectation. I think it's not going to take 5 years, and it's not going to take 2 months, but we might see the big breakthrough in 2024. Could be.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I would like to certainly keep updated on all this stuff to find out when, the first, I'm calling it like commercially available model. There are models that are available for public use, but I'm talking about a model that if you have a podcast, if you have a TV show, if you have any piece of content and you need it to be scored, you need some music behind it, you could go sign up for this model, type it in, and you would get just as good of music as some of the best world-class composers on earth. That's certainly going to be a moment we have to kind of be prepared for, because I think that moment is coming. I don't know if that's going to be coming this year, next year, but do you have any anticipation in terms of when that model could basically be ready to go? I know that's probably an impossible question to answer, but maybe some of the ramifications of that, if that does maybe surface in the next year or two, if it pops up and it's something that literally can create even the best score of some of the best composers in the world.
Yeah. So I think some of it is kind of predictable. So at least, the path to this breakthrough model is kind of predictable. I don't know how long the path is, but I think we're still we have a very similar technological progression than we had with text, where in 2018, we had the first model that produced like something that looked a little bit like human text, but not really. And then 2019, we had something that looked like human text, but it was obviously not coherent enough. And then 2019 and 20, it started to be like almost indistinguishable, but over long periods of text, so multiple paragraphs, you would see it's falling apart. And then 2022, ChatGPT, boom, right? So, and all they did essentially with these models is they scaled up everything, the amount of data, the size of the models. And of course, there's some algorithmic improvements, but the major part was really just scaling everything up, collecting enough data and kind of trying it out for a couple of years and increasing the size. And then suddenly this amazing ChatGPT emerges, or at least it was a little bit like that. So I expect it will be similar with music. So I've argued that Music LM from the beginning of 2023, so the original Music LM from January or February 23, I would say it's somewhere between GPT-1 and GPT-2. That is somewhere around 2019, probably, like if we just kind of expand that progression. So I would expect, we saw ChatGPT in 2022. We had comparable models 1 year before that or 2 years before that already, like that were not orders of magnitude different. So I would say we probably, if we just expand that, have maybe 2 to 4 years until we're probably going to have that moment. It might be 1 year because all of this hype, right? But I can't really imagine it would take longer than 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I always wonder how. I think the marketplace, like, there's such a split on this that like there's going to be some people that see that, that kind of a product offering. I'm sure the same thing, obviously, with GPT, which was that some people are like, this is an amazing tool. It's going to make me more productive. I can help, I can summarize things better. You can help me code. And there's going to be a good group of people that are like, this is amazing. I finally have a sort of personal assistant that's doing all this work for me. And then there's the other side that are, probably authors, journalists, people that are probably losing jobs, losing work as a result of this really powerful tool. And I would imagine, obviously, with a GPT for music, we're going to have the same kind of a divide where half the people, well, maybe not going to be half, but some percentage of people are going to be really empowered by it. Like we were talking about before, one of our previous conversations, people that didn't feel that they were musically inclined could now feel like they have access to be able to create in quotes, but create in a way music for themselves, prompt it with whatever lyrics they want, or if they just need some commercial transactional music, like I said, as a background, maybe a theme song, a jingle, something like that, they can actually use this. And it's like, wow, I can get a million different examples. I can do it for almost cheap to barely nothing. There will be no royalties because there's no owner of this music. There's no copyright, at least right now. It seems like that's where we're kind of leaning with that stuff. And then, of course, my community for sure is going to be probably the ones that are going like, not a big fan of that, because it's basically, it's a big kind of almost feels like a slap in the face to all the work and the hard effort that we put into our craft to have to make music. And now you just get this like, snap of the finger and people can do all this kind of heavy lifting essentially. So it's going to definitely cause a big rift in society and in our sort of communities. Do you have any sort of personal thoughts on that? Because I know you got a foot in both camps, right? And we've talked about this before, but I'm actually kind of curious if your thinking on that has evolved at all or changed in terms of, you are obviously a fan of the technology, you're excited about it, but you're a musician yourself, so you probably do feel a little bit of that kind of worry and concern that a lot of musicians do. So has any of that changed for you in the last 6 months?
Well, I mean, first of all, if anything changes like in that kind of magnitude, it's not going to come as a shock over 2 days or something. Because even if you look at ChatGPT, and ChatGPT was obviously a big moment, the biggest moment in AI history, just from a public reception perspective. But really, when you go online and you read articles in some media paper or something, some magazine, how many of those are fully written by AI? Like none. And of course, there's issues, and the internet is flooded with like Twitter bots and all that. But like really serious and kind of high-end productions in the text domain, they use ChatGPT as assistants, and maybe they use it for proofreading, they use it for generating drafts, and of course they also generate some sections of the text or something. But really, we haven't seen, at least in the last year, this big boom of AI-generated text. So in the long run, it's going to be very transformative, of course. But with music, it's going to be similar. So there's not going to be a music model that just pops up and then it suddenly replaces all of the work that musicians have ever been doing. That's not going to happen. And it's probably going to take a good while until the industry adapts to it and people adapt to it. So in the long run, it's going to change a lot. But I think if you kind of if you pick up on the new technologies and you try to kind of find what you can do with them, then you might be in a good position in the future. And I think actually there's a good chance that things are moving in this direction, because I was really surprised what Google announced in November 23. They announced kind of 3 new products. The first one was Lyria, which is going to be their new, essentially the Music LM successor, the new text-to-music model, which sounds even better. At least they're claiming that. It's going to have amazing lyrics and vocals, so like the new next generation model. They also want to release, a commercial product to YouTube Shorts, which is called Google Dream Track, where essentially you can upload you can add music to your YouTube Shorts, and you can type in some sort of theme or lyrics, and then an artist like T-Pain or Charlie Puth, I think they have them as artists in that program, licensed. They're going to sing that song for you, and it's going to compose all of the music. So that's already a kind of a collaboration aspect with musicians. And the third thing they announced was a kind of a studio. So they announced a music generation studio, essentially, which is kind of supposed to be a place where you can create sounds and compose music with AI. And it's really targeted towards more musicians actually than like absolute lay people. So that got me thinking a little bit, and I'm kind of hoping that what we're seeing is this attempt by Google to, there's two markets. There's the market for text to music. Maybe that's the stock market. That's just people that want to type some text and get the music and not change anything about it. And then there's the gigantic musician market that want to have tools that make their workflows more fun, more interesting, more productive. And I'm kind of thinking Google is currently trying to catch both of these markets by producing models that are high quality and that can do a lot on their own, but also they kind of cater to the different tasks that musicians are doing themselves and try to also make the musicians work better. So that's something I've observed, and maybe that's wishful thinking, but I'm kind of thinking that makes sense. If you want to be the leader in music AI, you're going to do both. You're going to target the lay people and also the expert musicians with that. And Google might have if someone has the chance to do that, it's going to be Google, right?
That's a great point. I'm really glad you brought that up too, because it's important for me also and for everybody to remember that even right now, you've got professional digital audio workstations like Logic Pro, Pro Tools, Ableton, right? But you've also got apps on your iPhone, if you don't know much about anything about creating music, where you can make a beat by downloading an app and hitting a couple buttons and make a beat. And there are definitely marketplaces for all of those, from the people that just want to click a couple of buttons to those that really want to get into the weeds and do the automation and all the crazy stuff that we do as composers. So you're absolutely right about that, to keep our heads not just in the sort of doom and gloom of generative music, but also of the tools that hopefully are going to be coming online as well to allow us to become more creative. That's a really good thing to kind of hold on to as well. So I totally appreciate that. So let's talk about weaknesses and strengths of these models as of now, early 2024. We talked about the lack of the memory, where it's basically not creating new music that's contextual to what it's previously created. So a lot of times these models are still struggling keeping a cohesive theme throughout it. That's definitely one. What are some other weaknesses that you've noticed playing around with these models in the last couple months?
Yeah. So it depends on the model also, of course, right? So there's different levels, but even the ones, the most recently released models, they all have this consistency issue, and for me that's like the biggest one. So the music they're producing, it's not even consistent over 10 seconds most of the time. So I don't care if it's a 2-minute track or a 30-minute track. If I can only use the first 10 seconds, that doesn't make a difference. So, and I've seen that with all models. And if you just look at, the new music LM, or when Google releases Lyria, they're going to have a fancy demo page, and there they're going to showcase the best versions that they were able to prompt. They probably fired off the same prompt 600 times, and that's probably someone full-time working on that task, and just picking the best one and putting that on the website. So when you really play around with the tools, and I know you did that with Music LM on the website also, you really find out there's always a gap between what you see online and then what really comes out. So the consistency is a major thing. So in my experience, when you prompt, 5 or 10 times, you're likely to get something that's consistent over 10 seconds, maybe. And that's not great. So that's a big area of improvement that we still have to cover. Then the second thing for me is just, the naturalness of the sounds. So it's like kind of everything still sounds unnatural, especially if you're listening to it on headphones. And as the more you increase the sample rate and the resolution, the more these things are obvious as well. So we're kind of getting to the point where it's much better, but still we're very sensitive to having, kind of weird sounds in music. It's like with language. So when I read a text and there's some weird word that's not like amazing in the text, that's not going to give me a weird feeling. I'm just going to be, okay, maybe they picked the wrong word. But if we listen to something and it sounds off, whether it's a voice or whether it's music, we immediately kind of realize that, and it feels awkward and we don't want to listen to it anymore. So that's kind of something that also needs to be worked on. And they're doing improvements in that. Again, for me, it's a matter of time until both of these issues are solved to some extent. And then vocals, yeah. I mean, they're working on vocals, but that's another huge problem to tackle. So how do you generate, the two hardest disciplines, generating music and then vocals? That's like the two things that humans are most sensitive towards, anything that's weird or uncanny. So that's a hard one.
And boy, vocals, it's all about that emotion, right? It's all about you feeling what that singer was trying to convey in their emotions. So can a AI generated voice generate that emotion? That's going to be a big test that we have to kind of see if they'll be able to do that. And yeah, it is. I've been covering this stuff for so long, and it's obviously the criticism that I've heard is, it obviously started off with, this isn't even music. I'm not threatened by this at all. To now, the biggest thing that I hear mostly is like, it still doesn't have soul, right? Which I think is kind of like it's a metaphor for what you're saying, which doesn't feel natural, right? Or it doesn't feel like it has a lot of clear emotional content to it, or for whatever reason, it just feels, like you said, artificial and not like a real human being was involved with that. So I feel that is a very solvable problem in terms of just instrumental music. The vocal side of it, that'll be a tricky one, because if you know it's AI, that'll be the whole thing. Like if you know who you're, even if it has a lot of emotional content, if you know it's AI, will that make the whole experience void of real meaning? And I tend to feel that it will, just because I have heard a lot of amazing AI voices generated out there. One of the most common ones I've talked about was that conversation with Joe Rogan and Sam Altman. It was a completely fictional AI generated conversation between the two of them with AI voices. Sounds just like them, even has their pauses and even some stuttering and some sort of, real human elements to it. But the fact that this was not a real conversation between these two minds, you kind of feel like you're getting the cheap tickets.
Yeah.
You're not really getting the real article of really what do these two gentlemen really think, and what would they really say if they were in the same room. Because then you hear the real conversation they had on their Ariel podcast. It's nothing like that conversation at all.
Yeah.
And it goes into some really interesting kind of unpredictable places. So that's what I wonder with music, how long will it take for us to get to that point? But even when we do get to that point, knowing that that's not a human being doing it, that's going to be a huge limitation. So let's talk about what AI is doing well, though. So as we've seen these, improvements in the last 6-7 months, what are some things that are making you go, wow, like that sounds actually a lot better than what it was doing before? We did talk about sample rate, and we talked about stereo. So we've kind of covered those. Maybe that's all you've heard, or is there any other elements that have been really standing out for you?
Yeah, we've seen these small incremental improvements in all domains. And over the year, it felt like everything was moving not so fast. But then recently, when I checked out the difference between the original Music LM and then the new Music LM, it feels like a big step. But personally, I feel like it's mostly, it's kind of incremental improvements on most domains. Although I will say that I was really surprised how well vocals are already working now. So there's been no good vocals up until fall 2023, and then suddenly there's some models that are popping up that produce at least fun vocals. Yeah, you're gonna know it's AI, but it might still be fun to play around with. And that was really surprising for me. But I think most of the really cool and kind of new things that I'm really surprised about, they come more from, again, the human-machine collaboration side. So there's been progress on, source separation, where you can, have a free text source separation, where you can just say, hey, give me the background guitar, but without the distortion or something. And then you get some results. And in the future, that's going to be possible. So you can extract individual stems from a natural language interface. Or you can already, there's been research by Native Instruments, for example, where they researched on text to sample generators, where you input something like, hey, give me an alien French horn sound. And then you not only get one sample, but you get all of the samples across all dynamic ranges, across the entire range of the instrument. So it's text to VST plugin, essentially. So those things get me really excited currently.
Yeah, wow, I did not know that's even possible. So that's really exciting too, for sure. And I'm sure Native Instruments will start implementing some of these kinds of tools into their plugins and into their features for all of us that are creating music. So we're really going to be excited about that. Well, that wraps it up today. Thank you so much, Max. Really appreciate you giving us some updates on where we are with AI. And obviously 2024 is going to be another whirlwind, I'm sure. We're going to be seeing all kinds of new developments and advancements in this space. I will definitely be keeping an eye on them through you, essentially. So thank you for doing the good work that you're doing. And again, guys, all of the companies and resources that we talked about in this conversation, we'll link those below so you guys can go check those out yourself. And definitely, again, go give Max a follow on Medium. Go check out StatWorks if you are a part of an organization or anybody that's looking to get further educated in the AI generative space. They cover all different areas of the sphere, and they can really, really get you or your company up to speed, because there's just, if you're not a company that's looking at AI right now in terms of what you should be how you should potentially be incorporating it into your business model, you are certainly going to be left behind very quickly, as a lot of other companies and organizations are realizing AI is a weapon to be, dealing with. It's something that you should be taking very seriously. So if you need to get educated on this stuff, StatWorks is a great company to go get started. They'll help you get some great resources for that. So thank you so much, Max. We'll talk to you hopefully very soon. We'll get maybe another update in maybe half a year, or whenever we get something that's a big or just eye opener. We'll definitely get you back on, hopefully, so we can let everybody know about that. So thank you so much, buddy.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Jesse.